The firearm confiscation program is here. Today, there was a press conference about the beginning of the firearm confiscation program, but really there's a lot more to talk about than what just happened today. As you may have seen, there was a huge leak on Sunday that translated into a bunch of stuff on Monday, and we will talk about it. But first, we need to talk about what happened today. Today, a press conference with Gary Prevost and the Cape Breton police chief went on, and it essentially outlined the test of the confiscation program. Now, there's a lot to talk about here, and I will have all of these links in the description below. But for now, let's talk about this program specifically. The program that they announced today in Cape Breton is actually really optional. It is a simple test run, and they only expect to collect about 200 firearms. And if you don't participate in this, then it doesn't matter, because the full program, the full confiscation program, is going to go on over the next year and a half-ish. Following the pilot, eligible firearm owners in Canada will be contacted by mail or email, provided with the information and to take part and declare their prohibited firearms. This is as I've said before, and this is as has been outlined in the past year. They're going to contact gun owners, and gun owners are going to give them the information if they want to, and then it will set up some form of confiscation period. Now, the confiscation period, according to this website, will start in early 2026. And so for those of you who are unaware, that means, yes, the amnesty will be extended. Now, I've seen some people say that it's extended a year until like October 2026, but as we'll get into later, that might not actually be the case. But very critically, you're not going to be getting your compensation, quote, for the confiscation for a number of weeks after. And this is also very important. We need to talk about the compensation part later. Now, this part has been just ridiculous. Over the last, I'd say about 2-ish months, we've seen the Liberals start calling this a voluntary program, that this is a voluntary buyback, that this is not forcing owners to have their guns confiscated. But that is absolute BS. As you can see, they say the compensation program is an option for individual firearm owner and businesses to seek compensation and dispose of the prohibited firearms before the end of the amnesty period. So when they say voluntary, they're not talking about a program as a whole that's voluntary. They're talking about the compensation part that's voluntary. If you keep your firearms, they will still be prohibited, and when the amnesty expires, should you keep them, you will technically be committing a serious crime. So it's only voluntary in the sense that you can choose to get payment for your firearms, but it's not voluntary in any other sense of the word. It is a complete abuse of the English language to say voluntary. So that's the program, and for a lot of you who follow my channel very closely, this will come as no surprise to you. This is what I've been saying since it was announced in March of this past year, and it has been speculated that this is what it's going to be for longer than that. But we also have a list of all the firearms and how much the government is going to be paying for them. Now, they do say firearm owners whose claims are accepted in the program can either turn in their firearms for compensation or permanently deactivate them and be reimbursed for a flat rate of $400 to $700 per firearm. Now, they also say, please note that submitting a declaration will not guarantee compensation. So if you deactivate your firearm, it might not actually guarantee you any compensation. And also just submitting the claim might not guarantee you compensation. Again, very important, we will get to this in a second. This is a list of every single firearm that has been banned, and you can see how much they're paying for them. Now, I want to highlight a few of them here. Now, the Lynx 180, that is SBI's 180 lower receiver. Importantly, SBI did not make a complete firearm. They only ever made the lower receiver and the upper receiver, both completely empty. So they're saying that it is $900 for a Lynx 180 lower receiver, which is like 3 times the amount of money that the receiver actually costs in the first place, which is kind of crazy. But on the other end, you have a much more insane price. The G36. The HK G36C, they are saying, is $770. These firearms were thousands of dollars, like multiple thousands of dollars, close to $10,000 I've seen some of them. and some of them are accurately represented here. So I have no idea why they think the G36C is so low. Maybe it's because there aren't actually very many in the country. The C model, if you're not aware, is the short-barreled rifle of the G36, and so they would have all had to have been registered. Now, with them being registered, they probably know exactly how many there are, and maybe there are just a handful in civilian hands, and so they're just saying, screw them, we'll give them nothing. It's actually ridiculous. Also, the Tommy Built TG36, that is way more than $850, so these guys are also getting screwed. And as another example, it's not based on the broad model of firearms. So AR-15s are not getting a single one. I thought they would be, but they're not. So if you have a Daniel Defense, you're going to get more compensation than you would for, say, a Smith & Wesson. But still, a lot of these numbers are quite low. These firearms are well below market value for, well, especially in Canadian dollars. If you're looking at these and thinking that doesn't sound that bad, you might be thinking in US dollars, especially over the last 5 years since we haven't seen any Canadian prices for AR-15s or anything like that. So these are well below market value and you are losing money on them. But that brings us to this. Sunday is when Tracy Wilson posted this YouTube video going over a recorded conversation between Gary and another person. Now some background on this recorded conversation. The person recording it wanted to remain anonymous, so they are, but it has come out that they are a tenant in one of Gary's properties that he owns. And the reason that he was recording in the first place is because it's generally a good idea for you to record any conversations you have with your landlord, just in case something comes up or you have to dispute it or whatever. It's always a good idea. And Gary, presumably knowing that his tenant is a firearms owner, brought up the firearm program himself. So it's a 20-minute conversation between Gary and his tenant about the confiscation program and about the whole thing in the first place. So there's a lot to talk about with it, and I'll hit you with the highlights. So I posted this on my YouTube channel. You can just go to my YouTube channel, go to post or community page or whatever it's called, and you can find Tracy Wilson's video as well as my summary of it. You can read it here if you want, but there's a few very key highlights here. Number one, they're still looking for people to help. This is part of the reason that it's taken so long. In Alberta and Saskatchewan, they are not getting any help. In fact, in these provinces, it's written into the law that you're not allowed to confiscate firearms unless you have a license to confiscate firearms, and they're not handing those out. So in Alberta and Saskatchewan, straight up not happening. In a lot of cities, police have outright refused to help with the confiscation because it takes up so many resources and it's just not worth the effort. That includes the OPP, which means outside of the GTA, you're going to have basically no support for any confiscation program in Ontario. And that's a very big deal. A notable exception is Winnipeg. The Winnipeg city government actually signed on for a deal to confiscate firearms, so that's going to be happening with the program launch and all that. Another important thing is the Toronto Police Union has been very vocal about their dislike of the program, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Toronto Police Union forces Toronto to not engage in it as well. Gary also said that Carney gave him a mandate to put an end to it. Now, this is kind of what I've been speculating, that they want to put this behind them. They don't want to deal with this anymore. They're just going to do it and get it over with. Now, as you see here, the government of Canada has not decided how long the amnesty order will be extended for. And this is important because as soon as they put an end date on the amnesty order, I think that's it. Part of the let's get it behind us mentality is we're not dealing with this anymore. We are just going to set a date at some later time, and we're going to say if you don't comply within this point, you're just going to become a criminal, and oh well. And this is important because Gary admitted there's going to be mass non-compliance. He even offered to pay his constituents bail, which is just... Gary admitting that there's going to be mass non-compliance is the government admitting they can't effectively do this in any way. And of course they're right. When you look at New Zealand had a compliance rate, I believe, of somewhere between 20 and 30%. It's going to be a lot lower in Canada when you look at the real numbers. And see, this is a trick that the government is going to be using, so keep an eye out for this. The minister is claiming that there are only 180,000 firearms that are impacted by the ban. Now, of course, this does not include the SKS, which we'll get to the SKS in a second, but that figure is incomprehensibly wrong. There are way, way, way more firearms than just 180,000 that they banned. AR-15s are the ones that are fully registered, and there's about 90-ish thousand of them. So they're saying that essentially there's only 90,000 other firearms that they banned, which is just comical. Like the M1 carbine that they banned in March probably alone has more than every other gun and well exceeds the 180,000 limit because there are just so many of them. But the reason that they're using this number is because they can say, we collected all of the AR-15s or a sizable portion of the AR-15s, and we collected a handful of others. Let's say they collect, 110,000. Well, in reality, that's going to be a tiny number. That's probably going to be close to like 15 to 25% compliance. Whereas according to their official numbers, it's going to be closer to like 60, 70% compliance. That's why they're using this number, because they want to make the compliance figures look higher than they actually are. Now, what else on the call? This one is probably the biggest bombshell. He admits that he would focus on actual criminals and blames Quebec for the focus on the gun bans. This is very likely a shot at Natalie Prevost and Polly and all of the other Montreal-based gun control groups, and he's fully right on this. If you recall, when the gun bans started in May 2020, Trudeau was going to do grandfathering like every other gun ban in Canada's past, but because of pressure from Quebec, they forced them to do a confiscation program. And Gary admits that if he had to start this again, he would not do the confiscation program. He probably wouldn't ban guns. He would instead focus on illegal firearms. This is entirely based on Quebec. And he reiterated that because it was an election promise that Carney made, they can't go back on their word. Except Carney has already gone back on multiple words, as we've gone over in the monthly politics updates over the summer. But he refuses to go back on this one. And it's very likely because the Quebec caucus has a lot of pull in the Liberal Party right now. The only reason the Liberals are in government right now is because of Quebec. If Quebec voted the same way that they had voted in the past two elections under Trudeau, it's very likely that the Conservatives and Liberals would be within 5 seats of each other. Maybe even Conservatives having a very unstable minority government. Regardless of what it would be extraordinarily unstable. So the whole pretext to this is that Gary admits that it's not going to work, that it's a waste of time, and that the only reason they're doing this is because they want to buy votes out of Quebec. That alone is a huge scandal. It's one of Trudeau's biggest scandals, right up there with SNC-Lavalin. But the problem is that scandals don't matter. Trudeau went down in the polls not because of his scandals, but because of the economy, and people were tired of Trudeau himself. At best, you could say the scandals brought him down from a majority to a minority government in 2019. That's really the best you can say, because a man who wore blackface multiple times somehow survived to win a minority government. Scandals just don't affect the Liberals for whatever reason. And in this case, it is also not going to affect the Liberals. Despite this being a major scandal, there's just too much going on. In the next week or two, we're probably going to switch to talking about the gigantic budget deficit. So in the grand scheme of things, this is not going to have an immediate impact. However, it is going to have a long-term impact. With the government essentially giving up the legitimacy of the program, it sets it up perfectly for a future Conservative government to come in and undo it all. Now, if you remember, the Long Gun Registry said it would only cost like $2 million, and it ended up costing $2 billion. And it ended up being scrapped by the Conservatives in 2011, or 12, I can't remember which one. But it was scrapped. This program is going to be, in my opinion, very similar. People might become criminals when the amnesty ends, but what I suspect is going to happen is that when the Conservatives win, and eventually they will win, Canada is not likely to become a country like Japan, although it's possible, it's always possible. Eventually the Conservatives will likely get into power, and as soon as they get into power, they're going to undo this, and they're going to make sure that people aren't criminals anymore. What does that look like exactly? We have absolutely no idea because they're not in government and they're not going to write a piece of legislation right now. But it gives them the legitimacy to do that. And finally, the other big thing, Gary admits that the budget is capped at $742 million. So what does that mean? That means that once the $742 million runs out, you will not get any compensation for your confiscated firearms. That alone is going to deter people from ever entering this. Now, what I didn't write in this summary is that Gary said there's going to be a change. We're not going to be doing what Trudeau was doing. And when you hear that, you're probably thinking, well, that kind of makes sense. This whole thing has been a complete circus. It took them 5 years to figure out how to do all of this, and it's not going very well. But they're just trying to get it across the line. And then this morning, there was this article. Now, I believe they actually changed the title of this. I believe this used to say Gun Control Group pushes for SKS ban or something like that. And you can see it here. Gun Control Group Pauly says the latest phase of buyback will be a waste of money unless it includes a ban on the SKS. So even Pauly is saying the gun confiscation program is a waste of money, which is just absolutely hilarious. But in the press release, I'm quoting Tim Thurley here, the minister claimed that the SKS is still under classification review. Provost made additional comments in French and he's waiting on translation. The translation hasn't come in yet, but very likely Provost is just reiterating the claims that her gun control group has been saying, which is they want a ban on the SKS and they want it now because they want every single semi-automatic firearm banned. And they actually want more than that ban, but for now they're sticking with semi-automatics. And this is where there's confusion over what the hell is going to happen in the future. Because if Gary is saying they're done with the gun bans and they're going to switch to other things like border security and illegal firearms, then they're not going to be banning the SKS. And adding the SKS to the banned list is going to make this about 1 billion times harder. The SKS alone has millions of them in Canada. And it's just the SKS, if everyone were to turn in their SKSs, would likely result in the budget cap being gone in seconds. It is it's part of the reason the SKS is still unbanned. Of course, there are the native reasons that they are unbanned, but just the logistics of the SKS makes it damn near impossible for it to happen. So this is not over yet, and we're going to see updates over the next few months as we head into 2026. If there are any major updates, I will make a video about them. If not, then I'll just put them in the monthly politics update videos. But that is it for this video. That is the firearm confiscation program. It has been launched and all the news that you need to know. If you want more information on this, go check out Ian Runkle's in-depth video on the call between Gary and his tenant. I'll have that linked in the description below. You can go watch the original source, which is Tracy Wilson. There's also a whole bunch of news outlets covering this. I recommend you just go to Tracy Wilson's Twitter account. She has a bunch of retweets and quote tweets of things you might be interested in. But that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.